Hey everybody, just a heads up that this episode features some cursing, so if that's not something you want playing with, I don't know, your kids in the car or, whatever your personal preferences, just keep that in mind and enjoy the episode.
X-Men. Get it!
Hey everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Battle of the Atom. This is your weekly X-Men podcast where normally we rank every story from A to Z, but instead we have a little bit of a surprise and some fun for you. Isn't that right, Adam?
That is correct. Folks, we are joined today by the new captain of the Marauders, Steve Orlando. Steve, thanks for being with us this week.
It's my pleasure, and I'm excited to. It's one of my first X podcasts, so I'm excited to talk at length.
Well, we are excited to have you. I know when you got announced on the book, I got a big smile on my face because I saw the front cover that spoke directly to me. I like to think, as someone who knows that Brimstone Love exists. It was like, oh, we're doing this now. That's great. We're in good hands. We're fine. We're fine. They gave me the cheap heat of bringing back somebody that I never expected, and boy, is it working. I'm very glad that we got the opportunity to talk to you here because I've gotten a chance. I guess everyone at this point has to read Marauders. I think it's off to a great start, and definitely want to talk to you about where things are going, and how we got there. But first I kind of want to start with how we got there. You've been in the comics industry as a pretty, substantial player for a while. You've been putting out a good amount of work, mostly over at DC with your stuff on, Supergirl, Wonder Woman, Martian Manhunter, JLA, just a lot of work that you were putting out there. But now you're over here. What's your history with X-Men, and what's attracting you to these books?
I think folks have heard me say it before. Like as an adult reader, I largely have been positioned as like a DC guy, which was probably true to an extent for a while, because the first books that I was buying regularly. When we got a comic store in my town, ended up being DC books. But put a pin in that for a minute because you'll see how we get there. Before then, I was buying things off the spinner rack or like flea markets in central New York, and all those books were Marvel books. And they were not in consecutive order. It was just whatever you could find. So for everybody who looks at me as like a deep cut or a continuity guy, it's probably because I was never reading things in the correct order, and I was just trying to figure out what had happened and see who looked, interesting. My first comic I ever got in the mid 80s was West Coast Avengers 16.
Oh, wow.
But to that end with X-Men, because we didn't have a comic store in my town, or at least on my side of the city, for a long time, my first entry point was both the infamous and amazing console arcade game, and then the pilot that went with it that I rented the shit out of at Video King prior to the X-Men. To the extent that I'd never read an X-Men comic I think that was 91, because I was like 6. But then when the 92 show came out, that obviously had a much longer run, my only reference point was the video game and the pilot. So I didn't know why like Dazzler was suddenly Southern and flying around. I didn't know why Wolverine was Canadian. I was like, and I also was like, where the fuck is Colossus? He's my boy, and he's in like 3 episodes. So I had, as with anything, it was a weird process. And then I was also, my father sold sports memorabilia, so I knew a shitload about random characters because I don't particularly like sports, or at least not the sports to get sports cards in the 90s. So I would be scouring for non-sports cards. And so again, before I had read a comic, I had, like every X-Men trading card set, the one with the very sexy Mojo 2, like that looked kind of like John Holmes plus Mojo. So I had all those. So I knew all these characters. I didn't really know how they fit together because I hadn't read the X-Men comics. I didn't have access in any regular form. Then we got a comic store, and I immediately picked up Grant and Howard on Justice League of America because it was like in the late 90s. What does this have to do with X-Men? Well, they ran the book, and then Grant left and came to do New X-Men. And at that point, and again, showing my foolishness as a youth, I was like, who is this Frank Whiteley motherfucker? This doesn't look anything like Howard Porter. Fuck this shit. And I love Howard, and I love Frank now, obviously. But I came and I basically stuck around as of New X-Men. That, however, wasn't my only flirtation in the 90s, because my mentors in comics actually were Joe Kelly and Steve Siegel, who were on
wow.
and the main X-Men book at the time. I can't recall which was which. But I did, when I first started going to shows and trying to learn how to write comics and break into comics, they were on, so they gave me a bunch of their work. So this is probably why I'm obsessed with Mero, Maggot, and Cecilia Reyes, even though I wasn't a regular reader then, because that was like the big new characters. And I still, to this day, say that if Grant had come up with Maggot 3 years later, he'd be like an all-timer.
Listen, as someone with more than 2 framed pictures of Maggot in this room, I can sympathize with that. The Kelly Siegel era is a wildly underrated time because they were doing some wild stuff with those books.
Well, yeah, and a lot of it got echoed, by people who had a bigger spotlight. I don't necessarily know that it was better accomplished, but their story about Cerebra coming to life is not unlike Danger in any way.
It's not.
Right. It's very similar.
But that said, so Mero was me, like when as a teenager, her like carving this way to a dark ride on her door, I was like, this is so dark. She's so conflicted. It's like Lydia Dietz like created a child with Wolverine. It's wonderful. And so I was big into that. And then when Grant came on, I follow, to this day, I follow him anywhere. So I was on for a long, long time with that. And just absorbed in that world. And, and the funny thing is that, I was on and off after that, but it's unquestionable to me. You can see the things that I've already done in the annual, the things I did in Magneto and the Mutant Force. Like what I really found exciting about that run is that it was not necessarily just running in place. Like there were big changes. It was really treating the school like a school, which is something that I had in mind. And since then, the runs that I've really gravitated towards are the ones that really are willing to give us not lasting change, because do we ever get that in comics, but periods of intense change.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of which, we are in the midst of sort of the third year. We're getting into Destiny of X now. How were you recruited into the X writing room? And not only like, what's that experience like now, but, what was your experience sort of going from the outside and reading about House of X, Powers of 10, going into this era and now being a part of it? Like, how is that different?
Well, I mean, so it's funny. People will probably see that I joined and they'll have like a Charlie Day conspiracy board about how this was always planned, because I did Curse of the Man-Thing, the X-Men issue, and then I did Magneto and the Mutant Force. But the truth is that both of those times I was like, I'm never going to get to fucking write these characters again. So I got to have all the fun I can, which is why Mero was in Magic, along with Magic herself. Pardon me. And that's why everyone I've ever liked in X-Men was in the Mutant Force, including Skymax the Skymaster and Mr. 1 and Mr. 2, a character that I thought I would finally have Al beat on, and then he put him in fucking Sword the same month that book came out. We didn't even know each other at that time, but I was like, mother of God, like, what do I have to do? Which, by the way, digression, but that Captain America Annual by the King with Mr. 1 and Mr. 2 is way ahead of its time. For if you are an X-Men reader and you've somehow skipped that random Captain America Annual, which you might have, because why would you know? It's written and drawn by Kirby, and it's largely about like Cap trying to like white guy his way into a situation, and Magneto saying like, no, you should let mutants handle mutant things because you don't really understand. and just decades ahead of its time. So worth checking out, and that's where Mr. 1 and Mr. 2 came from.
Also, peepers, folks.
Peeper, my second favorite person from Mutant Force behind Lifter, but anyway, so I did those, and I always thought it was going to be the last time, and I think, I was already very good friends with many people in the X-Men office. I don't know exactly who brought me up. I have my theories that it was probably Vita, because we talk a lot and we both like wrestling, and they're fantastic. And I'd worked with them at DC on Justice League. They did the reintroduction of Vixen with me, and they also did the Lee Serrano issue of Supergirl, which is the first time DC had a non-binary character. So we were already pretty close. So my guess is that they brought my name up when it turned out that Jerry was going to be moving to the treehouse and leaving the boat. But I don't know for sure. Could I go back in the Slack and time travel? Yeah, but I feel like that's like term searching yourself in real life. You don't want to do that. So, but that's my theory. And they came to me, and the options were to continue Marauders or to pitch something from scratch. But the thing was, when Jerry started the book, the mission was twofold, and it was rescuing mutants who couldn't get to Krakoa through a gate, and it was delivering these mutant medicines via the Hellfire Trading Company. And I loved Jerry's run, and it did focus a lot on the Hellfire side of things. So it just seemed natural to me, as someone who has personally done disaster relief and rescue type things. Folks, probably see me boosting my friend Jose Andres all the time on Twitter. I've been in the trenches with him in Panama City, Florida, after Hurricane Michael. So this is not something I've read about. It's something I've done with my own hands. And so it just seemed like a natural fit. I mean, could I have built something from the ground up? Yeah. And I fucking hope I can someday. But that said, it was just so smooth to be like, we have a mutant rescue book. You've lived this life. We should talk about it and talk about it. I did that a little bit in Wonder Woman, but I never really have gotten to do sort of a book that is really about the radical idealism and simplicity in many ways of relief efforts. And you don't have Jose Andres on this boat now. You have Kate Pride, but it's very similar in that he's a person. But when you talk to him, things seem very simple, but his simple statements encapsulate something very complicated. The whole city is condemned, and the mission is always just, well, people are hungry, so we're going to bring them food. And of course, you're almost like, why do you even have to say that? But then you think about how complicated and intense that process really is once you expand it. So it's something I did, and it just seemed to make sense. Obviously, I love what Jerry's done with Kate. With the added note of realizing that Leah was going to be transitioning into a new gig, which folks kind of have heard some of, but not all of. So mystery. But I mean, me turning down a chance to work with Akihiro, someone who basically, much like Midnighter, is the mutant version of me, an angry bisexual person who would gut everyone who challenges him if he could. Again, I just couldn't pass it up. So it just seemed like the stars were aligning, and then that's a little bit of copy edit bullshit, but it is true. In my case, they said I could do anything or this, but what I would have done in a perfect world was this, and it was taking over Marauders. Pardon me.
No, that's a very exciting thing to hear. I know one of the stated goals that they had when they were going into this era and how they were branding it was, hey, can we develop some, new legacy titles out of this? Marauders being one of them. And this is definitely the driving force of that. It's now gone to one of the things that X-Men has is, yes, there's pirates. That's part of X-Men now, right?
I mean, there's pirates, and for anybody who it's very clear that it's now pirates meet Star Trek. I even gave them their own to boldly go type mission phrase. So my influences are not subtle, folks.
Well, that's in the great X-Men tradition.
But yes, and the thing is too is that Star Trek is innately hopeful, and I think that especially now that's what Destiny of X is as well. That's not to say it's going to be without conflict. It's going to be with intense conflict, because anytime you are hopeful, there's always people that get fucking pissed off about it. So there'll be plenty of things blowing up still, I promise you.
Well, that's exciting to see. One of the things that, when a new writer tends to come onto a book, there tends to be blowing up of past plots, past character dynamics, things like that. Obviously, you're retaining a lot of stuff from Jerry's run on Marauders, with bringing in your own spin. But that was definitely a book that ended with some dangling plot threads and things like that. You're in an interesting position where the X office is very collaborative. People are not gone. They are still hanging around, having their own avenues to approach things that they might want to. But specifically with Marauders coming in, do you feel a stewardship towards that title to say, hey, these are some of the toys that were left over because of different reasons? Say, for example, the Aurora and Akihiro relationship from X Factor. With all that stuff sitting around in a big pot of this is what you could do. Do you feel an obligation or a need to play with that stuff and take your own spin on it, or do you really like to say, okay, this is what was done in the past and it was great, but I want to blaze my own trail?
I mean, the answer, and this is a boring answer perhaps, but the answer is always somewhere in the middle between those two things, because to do the latter is just to be an asshole, and to also be slave to the former is to sort of kneecap yourself. So, yeah, but at the same time, like, I'm stewarding. Well, I say it all the time online when people are like, "Why don't you just undo X, Y, and Z that someone did?" I am never a creator. I always try to respect what my peers have done, whether it's what I would have done or not, by the way, because that's what I want people to do with stuff I've done. So I would never just override things. But that said, are there things that I thought were a good fit for me to pick up in this book? Things like you mentioned, Akihiro and Aurora, the Kate Bishop sort of co-captainship. Kate and Bishop. I just realized Kate Bishop is another.
Yeah, that's a whole other bag of worms.
Different thing. That's okay.
Kate Lucas. Anyway, and then at the same time, if there were things that didn't seem a fit for the story we were going to tell, they're still going to be told somewhere. Not everything that Jerry dropped off in a basket at the end of his run of Marauders is going to be taken care of in Marauders, but that is not to say it's not going to be taken care of. It's like I saw someone online, God love you, and I respect your enthusiasm, that was like, oh, well, how does Kate feel about losing Emma and Iceman? Well, she lives in the world of the comics. She didn't lose Emma and Iceman. They're still around. I mean, and in the case of Emma, they're in a book together. It's just not mine. It's Kieran's. And in the case of Iceman, he has his own journey, and you've seen a little bit of it. I'm very good at not spoiling news, but I would say that Luciano did an Iceman New Year's book, and at the end it said Iceman will return. So I don't think it's a spoiler that Iceman will return. And in great hands, by the way. So everything, the benefit of being in a collaborative office is, like, we have that tech board and we know it's got to be knocked off. And the things that are going to make sense to get knocked off plot-wise in Marauders are going to get tied up. And the things that maybe don't fit for a rescue team book are still going to get tied up, but you might be surprised where.
No, that's good. For folks who may have missed that, because it was a Marvel Unlimited comic, but there is a Iceman, New Year's holiday special that you should definitely check out, that Luciano did, that is really fun and definitely an enjoyable thing to go see.
Yeah. Steve, I want to just kind of build off of this idea of creators blowing things up, because I want to ask you about something that you said before we came on the air, which was that in learning about what the Hickman thesis was going into the Hoxpox era, you kind of suggested that maybe your initial reaction to it wasn't that great, or maybe suspicious. I don't know what the right way to say it is, but
no, throw me in the chopping block. Keep going.
I think a lot of people have a similar, suspicion when a new writer comes on and sort of shakes the status quo. What were your initial thoughts about it, and how have they grown now that you're kind of part of the X office?
Well, look, I mean, so yeah, I think it's not a surprise to folks that we as creators talk. But as with any type of, there's no water cooler in comics. Well, there is. It's Twitter, and but in one of those situations, you're really playing a game of telephone, right? Mm-hmm. So you're right. By the time rumors of what John was planning reached me, I was suspicious of it because as a as a Jewish person, as a bisexual person, I'm pretty suspect of like exclusive communities and things like that. Of course, people deserve a safe place, but once you're playing this game of gossip and oh, this is what John's doing, the subtlety is lost. So by the time things reach me, and it's like only they have their own island and no one else can come in. Well, no one else can come in under any terms. Yeah, that gave me pause because I'm not trying to make this too much of a serious podcast, but as a bisexual person, it's like, okay, well, if we have this exclusive gay space, well, to me, historically, it's only a matter of time until, well, there starts to be, well, you're not gay enough, like, I mean, you don't identify strongly enough. A thing that I've been told regularly in my life without there being an exclusive island. And then it's, well, you can have queer people, but only queer people who are presenting queer, not queer people who are in relationships that appear heterosexual, like Dakin and Aurora. I mean, he's not any less bisexual for being with Aurora.
Right.
So I was suspicious is the right answer. But that said, once the book came out, obviously it was not as simplistic and totalitarian as I had worried, or I was suspect of, from the beginning. People can come, humans can come by invitation. And I think that is great. It puts the power in the community that's been historically marginalized. But it also doesn't say we're just going to shut ourselves off and sort of stew. And so I had my suspicions. But as with anything, once the book finally came out, they were all engaged as if presciently and diffused. And the world that we have now is everything I would want it to be. It is place. It is not a perfect place because all these things are works in progress. Our world's a work in progress. But it gives mutants a place to exist and be the ones in power, and at the same time does not cut them off from the world culture and greater participation. And so it's exactly where I hoped it would land, but I couldn't, of course, know that until the thing came out. So
now that's definitely a thought that is heavy, I think, on people's minds as they have read Marauders Annual that has just come out, because a lot of those, let's call them bad faith takes about a mutant island where there is some exclusivity, that is the root of the conflict in the Marauders Annual, with Brimstone Love being a bad faith actor talking about how actually mutants have turned their back on all their allies and everything is bad now. And to me, that is such a interesting approach to a comic like this, to walk a very fine line of directly addressing concerns that people have had while talking about, hey, hold on, let's look at this in the plot and make an engaging story out of it. What drove you to have that be your initial statement on the books? That's what you're coming out of the gate on, is here's my thoughts on Krakoa right there.
Well, I think in many ways that's an exorcism of my old opinions. Like if I was being like a reductionist asshole about it back in the day, so why not turn that into a villain who is a reductionist asshole? Of course, the difference being that I did not have the assets to know what Krakoa was really going to be, whereas Love knows very well that what he's peddling is bullshit, but it's bullshit that people will get sucked into. So I mean, I myself am not a geomancer, bullish guy.
Oh, but at the same time, that's going to take out a lot of the questions we had prepared. So
I know. But that said, I am hot tempered. But no, I wanted to. I had gone through this process myself in coming to love the current era as it was rolled out, and I thought, why not engage a lot of the assumptions I made and build a story out of that, because it was my own story. What better way to engage as I step into this office in this world than to dispel or at least imbue a lot of the wrong assumptions I made into a character, and to take a character, Brimstone Love, and give him something that I think is potentially more long lasting. I mean, his initial Theater of Pain sadistic sadomasochism stuff was interesting, but I think that there's deeper depths there,
Hmm.
that you can find.
We've got to talk about that. 'Cause this is a book where the antagonist is Brimstone Love from the X-Men 2099.
Well, this is a book where the antagonist is Brimstone Love. Like that's, it's funny. Like since we showed him on the cover, everybody has been sort of like theorizing, like, oh, did he come back in time and things like that. But I gotta be honest, we're sort of in an Occam's razor situation here. Not to age you, me, and anyone listening, but 2099 is only like 75 years away.
Yeah, it's really upsetting.
And mutants can be resurrected now. So, like, I think people are kind of overcomplicating like where he comes from.
He comes from the X-Men title, X-Men 2099. How about
Yes.
that?
Oh, I know, but people do think, oh, like he's coming back, but no, like he, like this is the. I mean, we don't like. This is the 616. I mean, version or however you want to say. But yeah, I mean, why 2099? Because I fucking loved it when I was younger. And if you go back and read it, I mean, there are obviously some things that have not aged amazingly, but I think the majority of it, I think John Francis Moore wrote, and it's very ahead of its time.
It
like
opens with themes about mutant community that the mainline books wouldn't delve into until like Morrison's run. Like,
yeah, I mean, and even the need for like intersectionality, pardon me, in the mutant community, like when Cheyenne is running down the previous mutant leaders before him, like everyone between him and Xavier are all, at least based off their names, that's all we know, are all leaders of color,
right?
And it just like a lot of the small cultural details, I think are really, really ahead of their time. And it was just always been an exciting book for me. I loved Skullfire as a kid because his name was Skullfire. I also love Bloodhawk for the same reason. Like let's not overcomplicate it. Like Bloodhawk, but and Cerebra, probably one of the first Indian mutant characters to be introduced. Regardless of timeline in the early 90s, like it was for decades before Trinary. And I just, and that goes for a lot of those other things. If you went and look back, I would argue there probably weren't many. I believe Mean Streak is of a Chinese background off the top of my head.
Yes.
Like it nailed a lot of things that would be coming in the main line. I mean, we're talking at least 10 years later, I think. I think Mean Streak's name is Henry Wong, but I don't know for sure. So I could be wrong.
He definitely has Asian heritage. I believe he's also French. But
so he's Henri Wong.
That may be right. It's been a spell since I've done a deep dive into X-Men 2099, and I have been very tempted. Just thanks to Brimstone Love being around again.
Well, I mean, and also like in a very like Neanderthalic sense, the action figure was cool as hell when I was younger, and I think and again, we need more. A lot of the villains from back in the day are on the Quiet Council now, so like we need some people. We need some people who are there to step in their place. And in Love's case, he could fight the whole team. He's a tank. I'll be happy to put him here and happy when he returns, if he returns. But come on.
You don't wrap up his story in the annual. I think it's fair to say that if there's more to tell about Brimstone Love.
Yeah, and you'll see him. I mean, we have the plot of the first, well, barring some stop-offs for things you guys don't know about, the plot of the first 10 issues is massive, and it's not a spoiler to say it spans billions of years.
Whoa.
I mean, that's in the solicits, so I know exactly what we wrote there, so I know what I can say and what I can't. And at the same time, we'll have someone on the trail of love, and it's kind of like, in a way, it's kind of like my favorite little cutaway scenes that I've been doing, because it's well, you'll see in issue 1, but it's been very pleasing, and you might see other obscure ass villains kind of get repositioned, because again, I think that now is the perfect time to add some other people and give them a push in wrestling terms, because guys like Apocalypse are off the table. They're, he's an Emmett. The guys like Sinister are on the fucking Quiet Council. I mean, he's obviously still villainous to anyone reading that book, but he's not like,
Oh, so you don't condone all of Sinister's actions? Are you taking that bold stance?
Yeah, please read the data page in Marauders 1. That is one of my favorite things I've ever written, which is just a transcription of him, Dr. Nemesis, and Reyes arguing over whether or not Cassandra's a mutant. And there's only one adult in that room, and you can already predict who it is. It's not Sinister. But that'll be in Marauders 1. But yeah, no. So I mean, Love will obviously be back, and Daken and Akihiro are probably going to want a reckoning. And although there's so much, provided we get away with it, the fight he has in issue 5 with someone is truly visceral. I read Victor Laval's Sabretooth 1, and I was like, all right, I have to raise my game. Very
I love how there's like these little competitions that happen between you guys that you're trying to one up each other.
Well, the funny thing is, like, that book is written by Victor, who is an incredibly nice person and much smarter than me, and drawn by Leonard Kirk, who also is one of the nicest people in comics. And yet it's this book where just people are wearing intestines like hats. And it's really, it was, I mean, it's a great book, but it was really surprising to me.
One of the things that you have a history of is pulling out very deep continuity cuts in your books. And obviously we just talked about Stone Love, but there's other characters just in this annual, like Carver or...
I recognized Carver immediately, and I did not ever expect to see Carver again.
Well, I needed an asshole, so I came up with a guy who was historically an asshole as well.
I do have to say, I did send my friend a message when I got this and said, "Oh, this is the most Steve Orlando character that could exist," and he was already in the book.
Really? I guess in some respects, I was going to say I thought that the best deep cut was Stitch from the Flight. They weren't even Alpha Flight back then. Back with Wolverine, and I believe St. Elmo was on that team as well.
Well, here's my problem. I did not read a not Alpha Flight book.
Mm.
Well, it does sound like it's a problem for you, my friend.
It is. It is.
And this leads to the question, which is, when you drop a character, we're deep continuity heads, at least we feel like it. And then you hit us up with somebody like Bouncer, who we have to look up. Do you get a kick out of exploring continuity so that you can surprise fans with these little cameos?
I'm glad people enjoy it, but I shouldn't say but. I'm glad people enjoy it. And the fact to me is that, like, I really... in a perfect world, I'd have time to polish all these things, because you know what? Someone made those characters, and I guess the secret, none of us set out to make a bad comic. So someone loved those characters, And so if I could remind people that they're there and add a little value to them, and also, like, not just the creators, somebody probably liked that character when they read the book. So if I can have a scene and just remind folks that someone that maybe they liked is still around, like, it is very pleasing for me. But it also comes from the perspective of, there's going to be a lot of new in Marauders. There's always a lot of new in my work. But at the same time, these characters exist in a world. And, why, if it could be anyone, why not make it someone? Like, could it have been some random that Tempo was breaking up with? Sure. But why not remind people that this character is around and has a life, and maybe there's more story in between if someone else wants to pick it up. And that's really where I'm coming from. And especially in the X-Men, the world of X-Men and the X-Men office, everybody, I don't think I will ever stump X fans, and I don't set out to. I set out to celebrate these obscure characters that someone probably still gets excited about. I know they do, because when I put Mammo Max on the Dark Ride, people are excited. And I'm happier for it.
That's great.
Now, speaking of new, Marauders also features one of the characters that you introduced over the summer, Insomnus. When you're creating a character like that, and especially writing him into your story, what do you look for to have that character add? When you're saying here's a new piece, do you look for what you think is missing in a book, what elements you want to add, or do you start from a character perspective of what character do I want to write, and then find a way to work them into the stories that you're telling?
Well, in Somnus's case, it's kind of a little of both, because again, shocking no one, I've done my fair share of fucking Pride specials, and I've created a lot of new, LGBTQ plus characters, mostly at DC because that's where I was. But I created a new one or spotlighted an old one in every book I did at some point. So for me, that brings up one of the facets of what you said. If I'm going to do this, how can I do it and make it different? Like every time I create or do one of these little shorts, I always try to say something new. Which is no shade to anyone doing something else, stories of people falling in love, finding their pride, acceptance. It's just that I've told those stories before. So, we were doing Marvel Voices Pride the same time I was doing DC Pride. DC Pride, I was like, oh, well, I said I'd never go back to Midnighter. Now here I am back to Midnighter. So I should at least do something different. And that's why we talked about straight washing in that story. I think that I never really talked about in a comic before. It's why we talked about bisexual erasure and Martian Manhunter with Diane Mead. And in the case of Somnus, it was a chance to talk about queer elders, which is something that I hadn't really done yet either. And that, much like the rescue part of Marauders, that comes from my own life. I moved to Boston. My neighbors are not all, but many of my neighbors are gay men in their mid 70s who lived through the AIDS crisis, and they're living history. I treasure knowing them and on their terms, listening to when they speak about what they survived, and I can't give them the life I have with my boyfriend now, or the life that my even younger cousins have now, like rolling around on TikTok with their dicks out or whatever they do. But I could create a character like Somnus that is an homage to that, and in Somnus you have someone who does get that second chance. What I wish I could do for these folks, did he live a bad life, as we say? No. And that was important to me. I didn't want his story to be one of like queer suffering, like, he died of old age, surrounded by a family that loved him, but didn't know his whole truth. And so it was a compromised life. And obviously, when you have someone like Akihiro in that story, well, he's not just going to stand for that shit. So what to him is the most reasonable thing, digging up his ex-lover's corpse and resurrecting them is what happens. But the real thing is with Somnus is, yes, I want to be able to talk about queer elders, and I want to be able to offer a story of someone getting a second chance who has watched his culture take leaps and bounds around him. And then, of course, apply that to mutant culture as well, because he is both a mutant and a gay man. And in both cases, the world of today is nothing like the world of 30 or 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where he came from. And I also think that's what makes him a great point of view character for the book, because all these things that seem mundane for your average mutant are incredibly fresh to him now. I mean, if you're on the X-Men, going to space is like going to fucking Whole Foods, but there's still wonder for him in doing these things. And that's a big part of his role in the initial arc, as well, how his dream powers work, and, how he begins to realize how the applications of them. Because, he spent a lifetime with Dakin in one night, or with Akihiro. I tend to alternate between them both, as you can see, in the 60s. But slowly he's realizing, well, he doesn't just have to play out these relationships. Can he spend a lifetime training with Red Lotus? Can he spend a lifetime learning, other skills, in the same way that you had that period where Madrox was having his dupes learn different things. So, and there's also one other key power that, or side effect of Somnus's power that gets brought up in issue 1 by someone, that makes him sort of stand out, in that because he has to welcome other people into his own dreamscape, he's like the ultimate doorman on his mind. So though it's not an offensive power, no one can get into his head if he doesn't want them to. And then it also goes for people like Charles and Cassandra. So it's not an offensive power, but it could be a strategic one that'll come into play in the future of the book.
Hey, do you think it's wild that you just mentioned Red Lotus as if that's a character that everybody knows?
Well, if they don't, then I guess that's on them.
I like that you want people to have done their homework. I appreciate that. Now, you just mentioned this perspective of, an elder queer character and wanting to speak to that. This Marauders cast that you have does have multiple queer characters. You're centering queer relationships with characters like Tempo. The Marauders Annual also had Iceman and Christian Frost kind of going on a date in Somnus's mind. We're seeing sort of a level of representation that I don't think readers, I think that readers want, but maybe haven't seen in the past. What are some ways in which you are looking to sort of delve into these kinds of stories in ways that are new? Because you just said, like, hey, just because I'm telling this kind of a story, I don't want to be one note about it. Are there things that you want to explore with these characters that maybe you haven't gotten a chance to before?
Well, I think you'll see that Insomnius sort of trying to break free of the mold of what relationships were thought of, when he sort of came of age versus now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, in the same way that I wanted to, when I was on Midnighter, have sort of a sex positive take that, didn't immediately like marry him up or partner him up as a way to chasten him. I think that there's a joy to exploring the present, both in the real, the lens of the real world and on Krakoa, where Simon doesn't have to just like be dating one person or things like that. If he doesn't want to, he can play the field, he can explore, I think there is a joy there. And again, the thing that I haven't gotten to really talk about, but that we will, we already do, is what I said before. Like, I am a bisexual man, and Akihiro's sexuality is just as valid, even though he's with Aurora. And that is something I haven't really gotten to talk about a lot. My best relationship, besides the one I'm currently in, was with someone who at the time identified as a woman. This was 15 years ago. And we were both bisexual, and it was no less valid than the relationship I'm in now, as far as my identity goes. So to me, that is one of the big pushes, characterization wise, of the book. But if folks have read my stuff, like, they know that this is not a I've never been someone who likes to scream my themes at the top of my lungs. So the implicit acceptance of these characters is a theme in of itself in my work. And though there will be struggle in the book, I tend to avoid struggle coming from sexuality. I will say that, because we've seen that. We've all seen Brokeback Mountain. No one's getting beaten to death with a tire iron in my books. At least not for their sexuality. Maybe for being a piece of shit, that might happen.
Well, other books and people who would use a tire iron to beat others with that you're writing is co-writing Giant-Size X-Men Thunderbird. I truly believe that John Proudstar would absolutely use a tire iron if needed. And
he'd be insulted. You'd think he would need a tire iron.
He wouldn't, but sometimes you like that flourish.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need a prop.
Maybe a folding chair.
From a wrestling standpoint, I feel like occasionally.
He beats people with a Jeep in the book.
We're talking about wrestling. You're co-writing that with AEW star Nyla Rose. What's that like? You're a big wrestle boy. You're a wrestling fan. What's it like?
It means when I make jokes about Hook on Fridays, I get direct text messages instead of direct messages now from Nyla about things.
Wow.
No, Nyla has been amazing. When we found out that Thunderbird was going to come back, I sort of pitched it to the X-Men office as like there's no way this is going to happen. But I was like, well, I'm acquainted with Nyla from social media. What if I just wrote it with her? Because her character is very similar in personality to Thunderbird, and it would be perfect. Like, we get, we bring her in, we add, the vital authenticity of that project. But I was still like, oh, this would never happen. Like they'll never sign off on all of the red tape and all these things. But as it turns out, Sarah Brunstad, who's been integral in the book, also a big wrestling fan. So she was ready to champion bringing Nyla in. And Nyla's mind, as you would imagine, as someone who tells narratives about violence every week, is a great fit for the character. And her perspective has been invaluable. And not just her perspective, by the way, but also that of David Cutler, who is our artist on the book, comes from a First Nations background. So we really, from top to bottom, I'm very proud to be able to basically just be here to help these people tell their story, and give Thunderbird the introduction that he deserves. And I couldn't have been happier with how things are going. Like there is obviously everybody has opinions anytime any character has a new costume, and his new costume is very different.
Mm-hmm.
What was very pleasing to me is to see folks who are actually from a native background getting it. I found threads online that were like, oh, well, here's why these colors are important to native folks, which to me is more important than we like the red and blue one, and that's what he looked like in 1950. Well, A, like Warpath is right there.
Right.
And we'll probably be back in that costume soon. But B, that wasn't designed by anyone it was designed by probably Cockrum.
Dave Cockrum, yep.
And Dave Cockrum is an amazing designer, but I would not go out of my way to guess that he did intense research on native culture.
I would doubt that. No.
And so to see someone like really understand that the colors of Thunderbird's new costume are extremely meaningful for folks from that background is very pleasing for me. And yeah, I can't wait for people to see it. As I said, it is extremely violent, but at the same time, like, exactly who he is by the end of that book. And that's been our goal from the start. How can we differentiate him from Warpath? How can we show where he fits in? And how can we show people who he really is? And who that is someone, as another character says in the book, is someone who is not often kind, but is always fair to the bone. And I think that tells you all you need to know about him.
Yeah, I'm interested to see you guys revisit this character who I think you mentioned this earlier, maybe before we went on air, has kind of been used as sort of almost a totem, throughout Warpath's life. And now we'll get a chance to actually go on his own adventures again, which is pretty exciting.
I mean, yeah, he's not a nice guy. It's easy to deify people when they're not around to show you that they're anything but that. But we do offer him more complexity than he was offered in the past. But that said, he is directly responsible for his own death, which I'm only laughing about because
punched the airplane as hard as he punched the airplane. Constantly.
Well, yeah, as every other member of the team is like, you got to get off that, and he's like, well, I'm not listening to you. Okay. But that said, I have been that stubborn routinely in my life, so I find that extremely relatable.
No, it's exciting. There's a lot of fun stuff that's coming, and you know what? I'm really looking forward to it. So, Steve, beyond that, do you got anything on the table that you want to let folks know about that's coming soon?
Well, so folks who follow me on social know that I posted art by Paul Fry of Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099. So while I can't say what it is, I do not think that I'm crossing any lines by saying I am working on a 2099 project that is very exciting to me, as someone who grew up reading that. And Paul Fry's art is incredible, and all the other artists involved are just like top to bottom over delivering. You're going to see folks that you love from back in the day. You're going to see new versions of existing Marvel characters, with 2099 identities, and you're going to see original characters as well. So it's very pleasing to me. I'm chomping at the bit to say more, but who knows when I'll be able to. But it's in progress. If we would love to, Nyla and I would love to do more Thunderbirds. So that a lot of that will depend on how the Giant-Size issue is received, but. And that being said, too, there's just so much coming in Marauders. I teased that there's going to be a ninth person who joins. But even beyond that, like I said, you asked about joining the office, and I have been so empowered and excited about how supportive everyone has been and collaborative. So by the end of the first 10 issues, there will be revelations that, tie back to John's work in House of X. I mean, again, it says in the solicits, John notes that Apocalypse is the first of the second generation of mutants. We're going to be exploring the first generation, the last of the first, and it's going to matter. It's going to directly tie to things that have been going on with Krakoa and Ayako, and to be building out just thousands of years of history is like a dream come true for me. We'll see if it makes it into the final solicits, but I did put an issue 4. I said the last line was, and also including 10,000 years of first appearances. So hopefully that's my best-selling issue ever. But it's just like it's easily, the instant I saw Eleonora's work in the main book, it instantly became some of my favorite stuff I've been part of, along with like Martian Manhunter or Kill a Man at Aftershock. And the support has been wholly unique. They just keep saying swing bigger, go farther, and we're going to try for as long as we can.
Nice.
That's exciting.
That's really exciting.
There is nothing I like more in comics than a big swing.
Well, this one is pretty large, my friend.
That's good. That's good. If folks want to find you online anywhere, that they should be following you on those socials media.
Yeah. I mean, I'm on Instagram and Twitter at the Steve Orlando in both cases, and I'm pretty accessible there. So I don't even know if my Facebook is public anymore or viewable, but I keep that for my personal stuff. So find me on Instagram, find me on Twitter. It's very easy. I am on Twitter until my boyfriend says to put my phone down. So I'll be there.
I can appreciate that, folks. That'll definitely do it for this episode. Definitely want to thank Steve again for joining us here. Before the end of this episode, folks, we actually have something a little special for you. The artist for the Marauders Annual #1, Creees Lee, and I had a conversation back at C2E2 that we're going to add to this, talking a bit about the book and what Creees has been doing. So definitely check that out. Otherwise, next week we're going to be talking. What are we talking about next week, Adam?
Talking about Galactus of all things.
The X-Men character Galactus, and all the good Galactus stories in X-Men.
We're talking about Red Lotus, noted icon of the underworld. Red Lotus.
I think we may have actually covered every Red Lotus appearance in the 600 stories that we have previously covered.
That's possible, yeah.
Well, listen. My run's not over yet. Someday, if you really want to know where my heart is for things that I haven't planned yet, someday Lifeguards, someday Slipstream.
You are making so many people happy right now. There's
or mad. I mean, it could go both ways, really.
I said someday, folks, and I mean the list is long. Oh, and someday. A big, positive, and exciting reimagining of a character of the Mutant Liberation Front that was done real dirty, but I'll leave that a mystery. So.
Ooh.
Hey, we're excited to hear that. But until then, folks, this has been Battle of the Atom. We hope you survived the experience.
I'm here with Creees. You are an artist, and you are the artist on the upcoming Marauders Annual #1, relaunching the series with Steve Orlando.
Yes.
With that's I would call that a very weird X-Men book.
Honestly, I've never heard about the Marauders before.
Really?
I'm not caught up on any of...
Well, how dare you?
Seriously. It's tough catching up on all the comics, Yeah. So, I mean, I did some research before drawing it. It seemed really cool. Got me interested in it.
So you were more approaching this as just like, this is a new project to me. It's got nothing on the background that I have to live up to. It's just, I'm going to do this best I can.
Yeah, I mean, it was my first full issue for Marvel. So I kind of was more excited about just getting the offer than whichever title, like having a preference on the title to work on. So
now you've been doing a lot of covers for Marvel and other publishers for the last little bit. What's the difference in your mind going from some of these covers, which I'm looking at your commissions and your prints and all this stuff, very strong detailed work. How do you switch your mind to go from, these big it's
It's tough because, each page is full of, like, average, like, 5 or 6 different illustrations.
Right.
And you have to tell a story. So it's not just about making an image look cool and, like, catching people's eyes, but you really have to make the story make sense, and, like, there's, like, eye flow and composition to think about to, like, help move the story. So yeah, no, it's tough, but, like, doing the layouts, I try to think about all the things that I learned, how to draw comics, and try to incorporate that into every page to make the best pages possible. So you kind of look at the overall page as one illustration. And, yeah, I mean, it's different, but I try.
Sure. So what would you say, if you were going to describe your artistic influences, what kind of drives you? Because I'm looking at a Gru commission that you're doing right now.
Yeah.
That's very different than some of the other detailed, like, prints you got up here. There's some of these that have, like, a manga influence, some of them that are closer to, like, a turn of the century, like a decompressed Brian Hitch, David Finch kind of very detailed style. I mean, what do you think, because I'm seeing a lot here. Where do you kind of come from when it comes to your art?
Well, this commission specifically of Gru, I had no idea who this character was. And this kind of for a friend, so I kind of said okay. And asked him if he wanted it in the original style or if in my style. And it's so unique that I think it'll be tough to incorporate into my style.
Right.
Because, when you look at this character, it's like his body shape with, like, the really big upper half. Like, if I translated that into, like, my style, I don't know if that would work as well.
Right.
So I kind of just kept it as original as possible.
I mean, it's very strongly a cartooning style. Sergio Antonis doing everything by hand.
Yeah,
getting very expressive and all that.
Yeah. But normally for my art, I think a couple people that I took the biggest influence from, like, especially early on, I mean, Jim Lee, like, like, he's a big one for everyone. But Jim Lee was a big one. Kenneth the Rock Report.
Yep.
I really like certain things about their art. Like, some people I'll take, like, their anatomy. I'll try to take some of their anatomy from. Some people I'll try to take, like, their inking from. So, like, back then it was more like Sean Murphy, Matteo Scalera. But then now recently I've been looking more like Olivier Coipel.
Yep.
Because I've been using pens more, trying to get, like, the little hashing. So it's just like a weird mix. And then people say I have, like, a good mix of, like, Western and Eastern style.
Sure.
I just say it comes from my blood. Like, I never really tried to, I was never really hugely influenced by anime, but, I think it's fair too.
Yeah, I'm looking at this this print you got right there that's got a lot of heavy Eastern influence on it.
Yeah, so especially when I work with, like, when I try to recreate, like, an anime piece. Yep. I'll try to keep some of their style in, and change it into my style, because, like, it doesn't translate as well sometimes. So, like, for this Demon Slayer piece, I'll try to, like, keep their eyes, the way they draw their eyes in the manga and anime, like, similar when I draw it and stuff. So, but then, like, the shading, it might be completely different.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, you've mentioned that from a couple different pieces, you're trying to keep some of the influences of the original work. When you come to a, IP like Marvel or DC, where those characters and those designs have been influenced and interpreted in darn near every style possible, where does your mind default to? I know you mentioned Jim Lee, which is obviously a huge influence on the DC side.
Yeah. I think if it's for, like, a print or whatever, I think I feel like I have a little bit more freedom.
Yep.
But when I was working on the Marauders, it was more just getting everything accurate and, like, consistent with the previous comic. Yeah, I try not to change too much in case I get in, like, trouble or something, or they ask for, like, a lot of edits. So yeah, I'll just, like, kind of default to the previous references that they give me, or, like, So
good. So you got Marauders coming out in the early 22.
I think it's next month.
Yep.
So January. Yeah.
Is there anything else on the docket that you've got coming up that you can talk about?
I'm working on the creator-owned, but unfortunately I can't really talk about it too much. It's for a new publisher, working with some friends, and yeah, I've been on that one, and then in the middle of that, I got contacted by Marvel to work on the new Marauders, so I couldn't say no.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, so I had to put that other project kind of on hold, but everybody was like understanding, which was super cool. I'm gonna continue to do covers though, as long as they want me to. So I have a couple covers coming out. Yeah, I don't know if I can say.
Sure, you're fine.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's mostly just those things. And whatever might come up in the future. So.
Well, that sounds good. Hopefully we'll see a lot more of you coming up soon.
Get